Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. It is a pleasure to be learning with you all as part of Summer's Month at Drisha. This is the first session of Mishnah in-depth Bava Kamma, starting off a new Seder in our ongoing series. And we have the pleasure of learning Bava Kamma with Rabbi Alex Israel. This class is part of our Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored in the Rifka Rosenwein's memory by her family. This class is working with the most standard daily Mishnah study schedule over a period of, with the intention that you're studying 1 to 2 mishnayot per day on your own, and then once a week we will have this class together and talk about what's come up, and to if you want to study with any particular Mishnah edition or translation, we'll do what works for you. There are many options. If you're looking for Hebrew English, Art Scroll and Kahati certainly have you covered. There's Sparia, and if you want commentary, there is an entire world out there. And for those who have had the pleasure of learning with Alex Israel before, excellent. And if you haven't, I would like to introduce him. Rabbi Alex Israel is an author, an educator, and a lecturer. He teaches at Yeshivat Eretz HaTzvi and Midrashet Lindenbaum, and records a daily 9 to 9 podcast, the Tanakh podcast. Born and raised in London, Rabbi Alex Israel made Aliyah in 1991. His smicha is from the Israeli Chief Rabbinate, following several years of study at Yeshivat Har Etzion. He holds degrees from the London School of Economics, the Institute of Education, and from Bar Ilan, and has written several books on Sefer Melachim. And with that, I want to hand things over to Rabbi Israel.
First of all, welcome. Welcome to you all, and welcome to the wonderful world of Mishnah. And the reason why I want to tell you why I'm so excited to be here today. Well, first of all, Drisha is always a pleasure. However, I am a Mishnah, regular. I learn Mishnah every single day. And I'm going to tell you how I started so that maybe I can convert you to this as well. When, a long time ago, and this has to be at least 28 years ago, but it was more than that. Somebody told me a great story. He said that when he had a baby daughter. Now, by the way, I do not remember who this person is, but I owe a great deal to this person. He's going to one day hear me telling the story and say, that was me. Whichever way, I don't remember who told me this. This man had a daughter, and he made a kiddush for his daughter's birth. And the rabbi of the synagogue came to him and said, you know, that if you learn 1 Mishnah a day from now, by the time your daughter is bat mitzvah, you will make a siyum on the whole of Shas, the whole of the Mishnah, the whole 6 orders of the Mishnah. And he said, well, I'll do that. So he started learning 1 Mishnah a day, and every day he'd sit in the living room chair and learn a Mishnah. Lo and behold, when his daughter was a little older, she said to her, Abba, what do you do every single night sitting in that armchair? Like, what is that book you're reading? And he said, well, my little dear, this is something I've done since the day you were born, since the week you were born. And when you get to your bat mitzvah, I'm going to finish. And she said, well, Abba, can I learn with you? And he said, sure. She climbed onto his lap and they learned a Mishnah. And the next day, another Mishnah. And eventually, as she got close to her bat mitzvah, she caught up. And they made a siyum on Mishnah, his daughter's bat mitzvah. And I thought this was such a lovely idea. I heard this when I was single. And I said, wow, I would love to do a thing like that. So when my wife was giving birth to our first child, who is now 28, I packed a Masechet Brachot, the first tractate of the Mishnah. I packed it into the bag, and that she was going to take to the hospital. And I said, when all of the drama of the birth is done with, I will learn the first Mishnah in Gemara, the first Mishnah in Shas. And so I did. And I studied a Mishnah a day. I actually found that a Mishnah a day was a little too little. It's not easy to keep the thread of a Mishnah a day. I upped it to 2 mishnayot a day. And actually, for his 6th birthday, I finished my first time Shas Mishnah, and he finished together with me Masechet Brachot. And it was a wonderful, wonderful occasion. I still have pictures of this very sweet 6-year-old who who literally just got out of fighting in Gaza this morning, who's now actually a father of his own, the 2 lovely children. And I've been learning Mishnah every single day ever since my son was born. I now study a chapter of Mishnah a day, and I am now on my 12th time round the whole cycle of Mishnah. I haven't yet achieved my goal of going through the whole of Daf Yomi, but I've managed to get through Mishnah already 11 times, and I'm, 5, 6 through my 12th round, and that is one of the reasons why when I was asked to do this Mishnah Yomit, this idea of doing Mishnah every, to encourage people and to have people who are studying a Mishnah a day, I thought this was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And so I just want to, all of those who are studying a Mishnah a day, I want to encourage you and say, Chazak ve'ematz, keep at it. It's a little effort on a daily basis, and it's one of those things, I don't know if you're into atomic habits or tiny habits, but it's one of those habits you do, which then builds up a great dividend. So there you go. And wait, Kayla, can you share the source sheet maybe in the chat if you possibly?
Absolutely.
That would be great. And then, so if people need a source sheet, that's what we're going to try and do. And you can download it. I'm going to be sharing it in a minute, but some people prefer to have their own copy. So there you go. Okay, so let's introduce what we're going to do today. Today, last week, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, the Mishnah Yomit program, it's a global program, began Bava Kamma. Bava Kamma is a great name. And in fact, this is the beginning of a Seder, which is called the Seder of Nezikin. And I want to explain what that, again, I don't know, maybe we can do a show of hands. How many people are very familiar with the world of Mishnah here? Sort of, not so much. Okay, kacha, not. Okay, all right. So we actually planned a very advanced class today. We'll have to see. We'll go with the level and we'll see how we do. And so you're meant to start Bava Kamma last week. As Kayla correctly said, you can find Mishnah online very, very easily. Maybe the easiest place is Sefaria or Al HaTorah, which are online, things, but you can find a book, Art Scroll, Steinsaltz, Kahati, whatever it is. And Nezikin is sort of challenging. I'm going to share my screen so that you can. Okay, so I hope people can see the screen, and yeah. All right, so let's take a look. I hope on your screen you can see. There are 6 Sedarim of Mishnah, 6. You can see it on the table with green at the top. Okay, they divide Jewish law into 6 sort of categories. So we have Zeraim. I hope people can see where I'm highlighting. Zeraim, which deals with all sorts of agricultural stuff. We have Moed, which deals with Shabbat and holidays. We have Nashim, which deals with, they say here, marriage and divorce, but it deals with a lot more than marriage and divorce. It deals with Sotah and with Nazir and with various different vows and all sorts of fascinating things in the world of Nashim. And now we are starting a whole new segment, one of the 6 orders of the Mishnah, called Nezikin. And Nezikin is damages. I'll come back to that. Then, by the way, there's Kodshim, which is the rituals of the temple. Okay, and Taharot, which is rules of purification. What is pure? What is impure? What sort of, how should I say it? What transmits or is a sort of purveyor of impurity and what isn't. And okay, if they would have asked me to teach Tarot, I wouldn't have agreed. But Nezikin is fine. Okay, Now, there's something very exciting about learning Nezikin, and let me explain. A lot of times we think that Judaism is about Shabbat, it's about kashrut, it's about what we do in the synagogue, it's about visiting the sick. But this is an area where we're saying that Judaism is literally about the things that we encounter every single day. It's about general, human engagement with life. It's God in the real world. It's the idea that every interaction we have with another person is is a source of Jewish law and is something which where Jewish law okay, I'm just looking at I'm looking at the chat, but we're good. Okay, so this is an area where Jewish law is, really in our lives. Let's take a look. What is in the Tractates of Nezikin? Again, somebody wrote that they want a bit of background. So let me give you even some further background, which is that the Mishnah is a book which was compiled over several hundred years. At a certain point, at the end of the period of the Second Temple, I'm talking about the 1st century BCE, and then following in the 1st and 2nd century, rabbis started committing certain formulae of Jewish law to memory. They don't necessarily write them down. Some people think that each different Bet Midrash wrote things down. So even before Hillel and Shammai, and then Hillel and Shammai about the year 0, and then Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai after them, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is about the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, in the year 70. So rabbis are slowly establishing Batei Midrash, and they're coming up with formulae of Jewish law. I'm going to talk more about these formulae. And eventually, in around the year 200, the famous Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, decided that it was time, because the Roman occupation of Eretz Israel was so intense, it was hard for Jews to live there. Jews were emigrating from the land of Israel to Babylon, to other places, and the centers of Torah study, where a lot was committed to memory, were simply depleting. And the worry was that all of this was called the oral law because it was oral, it wasn't written down. He said, you know what? We're going to have to write it down. Otherwise, this whole body of knowledge is going to get absolutely lost. And they started committing it to writing, and so the Mishnah was created. The Mishnah is the foundation of the Talmud. The Mishnah is completed around the year 200. The Talmud is the conversations which happen on the basis of that canonical text. And there are 2 Talmuds, one from Eretz Israel and one from Babylon, the Yerushalmi and the Bavli, and that's what we have. Okay, so but we're learning the Mishnah, which is a very concise text. It was written in the land of Israel. It was written in Hebrew, not Aramaic. It is a very tight text, and therefore I'll talk more about it in a few minutes. Let's just say a little bit about Nezikin, which is what we're looking at in front of us on the screen. What you can see here is that there are a whole bunch of different tractates, they're called, in the square on the right. This is what is inside Nezikin, which deals with civil and criminal law. I'm just going to read this through so that because I wrote it. Okay, so Bava Kamma, right, which is what we're going to learn. It's about damages, personal injury, theft, and robbery. I'll say something about that order in a second. Bamatzia, lost and found objects, guarding an object. Let's say you lend me your laptop, and I've borrowed your laptop, and now I get water on it. I spill my coffee on it. Who is liable? Right? What happens if I rent a car and I spill water on it? Am I liable, or is the rental company liable? Right? What happens if I rent a car and it breaks down? Who's liable? Right? On our overcharging, hiring a rentals, we said Bava Batra, property rights. Okay, I have a neighbor, or I live in an apartment who worries about fixing the elevator. Okay, transactions, inheritance, documentation, Sanhedrin, laws of courts, jurisdictions and procedures, capital offenses, makot, right, which is the questions of testimony and various lashes. Literally, it means they would give lashes to people as a punishment. Who gets those things? Then oaths, in order to establish a court, maybe you will engage in an oath. That is one of like 4 or 5 different types of oaths that are discussed in the Masechet Shavuot. By the way, a Masechet is called a tractate. A Masechet is literally like a weave. Literally, that's the word, what the word means. It's a woven fabric. So a Masechet is sort of like a tapestry, okay? We call it a tractate. I actually don't know what that word means in English, but it really means, in Hebrew, means a sort of fabric. A duyot, one of the most fascinating tractates. It's just a list of traditions of rabbinic law. So different people will say an edut. I heard somebody did this. I heard somebody did this. These 5 things were the practices of my rabbi. These 4 things were the practices of my rabbi. And so it goes, avodah zarah, idolatry, which is, how do you define idolatry? Because idolatry is something which we prohibit and has a capital offense to it. Pirkei Avot, you're familiar with that, ethics of the fathers, and then Horayot, what happens when the court makes a mistake. So as you can see, the last 4 or 5 tractates are all about court procedure. The first 4 are the first 3 are about what the court is judging. So that's what we're studying. Okay. Now, the words Bava, Kamma. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's try and put this in a certain context. Yeah. So really, this is the Order of Nezikin, but in fact, for the rabbis, we're actually going to be learning what's called Masechet Nezikin. There was one long text which had 30 chapters, all about different types of damages. But 30 chapters is very intimidating. Who wants to start a book with 30 chapters, right? People will start with the short ones. This is really important stuff. So what they did was they divided up into groups. They called the first one Baba Kamma, which means first gate. The second one, Baba Metzia, which means second gate, or middle gate, really. And Baba Batra means the final gate. So they divided 30 chapters into 3. Now, was there a reason to divide them in the way they did, or is it just arbitrary? It's a good question. They divided them into 10, 10, and 10. Just to, for some of you, how you will maybe know these words. Bab, right? You probably, maybe those of you who visited Israel, or maybe you'll know your Israeli music. Bab El Wad, right? Bab El Wad is a famous song from 1948. And Bab is it actually means in Hebrew, Shar Hagai, right? The gate to the valley. So a Bab, even people say Bavel, the word Bavel, Babylon, was the gate to God. Bab El, the gate to God. So Baba is a gate. Kamma means first, right? The first one. Matzia is like enter, middle, and Batra is final. Okay? What do they deal with? So let's take a look at the Rambam below. Okay, the Rambam suggested that in fact each of them are centering around a very specific text. So I'll read it in English. Maybe that will help us today.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, Debbie.
What language were they speaking at that time? Were they speaking Aramaic or Hebrew?
I think they were probably speaking Aramaic more than Hebrew.
So isn't it interesting that they wrote the Mishnah in Hebrew?
Yeah, I think there was a very deliberate goal of doing that. In other words, it's clear to me they spoke both languages. There is a dialect of Aramaic in Israel and a dialect of Aramaic in Bavel, and it seems that was more the lingua franca. That's what they used. But there was a deliberate sense to put this book into the canon, and therefore they wanted it to be done. And the Ivrit, by the way, there's a lot of work done on, we're now in an era when Ivrit has been revived, but a lot of the time when they wanted to figure out words to use, they went back to the Mishnah to try and discover, roots of words, unusual usages of words. I'll also say the Mishnah is also very interesting for people studying ancient Greek, because frequently when they discuss objects, they will go back to the Mishnah and say, wow, they called it a this, Even the word Sanhedrin is not a Jewish word. In Hebrew, it's the Beit Din Hagadol, right? But Sanhedrin is a Greek word, and many other Greek words, especially household objects, will be, like even in Hebrew. By the way, Hebrew here today in Israel, they have to put in a huge amount of effort to make sure that people don't use English words. Because like when people started using a laptop, they said laptop. And then, on Israeli radio, there is actually a law passed in Knesset that Israeli radio has to use proper Hebrew. And they can't. And so, you'll hear sometimes they'll use an English word and then they'll say, oh, we're going to get into trouble if we use that. Our linguistic advisor is going to tell us off. Oh, here's the word in Hebrew, right? So they'll talk about the internet, but really they should talk about the mirshetet, which comes from the word reshet, which is a web, right? So so it's very interesting. But they learn a lot of Hebrew from the Mishnah, and I think it was done. It wasn't necessarily the language they used. A way that you can tell that is, for example, when they write out the language of the ketubah in the Mishnah, it's written in Aramaic, which means that people were more familiar using Aramaic in their everyday contracts. But the Mishnah deliberately uses Hebrew. Okay?
No, it's just interesting that these aren't these the first three that I've encountered where the titles are in Aramaic. Are there other ones?
Where the titles are in Aramaic. That's what you're saying. Are there other ones? No, not that I can think of. So
and
that
why
shows,
would these be? That's just, I mean,
so
it's
Debbie, you've stumbled on a wonderful chidush, right? Which is this: the division into three masechtot, into three different Bava Kamma, is from Babylon. That's your answer. When you look at the ancient manuscripts from the land of Israel, they get to Baba Metzia, and we start because our tradition goes through Babylon, and we say it's the middle gate. Here's Perek Aleph. Look in the ancient manuscript, what's called the Kaufman manuscript, the most accurate manuscript of the Mishnah. And what does it say? Chapter 11. Chapter 11. And when you look at Baba Batra, it's chapter 21, because in Eretz Israel, all these three were actually one Masechet called Masechet Nezikin, of 30 chapters long in the land of Israel. When it got to Babylon, they said, oh gosh, nobody's going to want to read a 30 chapter one. And they divided it into three, and that's how it stuck. And that's why the names are in Aramaic, because they didn't bother with Hebrew in Babylon. Yeah. So you are on the you're following, and you're thinking 100% correct. Okay, so here is the Rambam. So now so if you've already realized that, then what's fascinating is the question is the division into three sort of afterthoughts, which is after the fact, or in fact, is there really three discrete topics? And obviously, this is going to be an interesting discussion. The person who insisted that there were three sort of like independent topics was, in fact, Maimonides. And that's what we're reading here. The Rambam, in his introduction to the Mishnah. I'm going to cheat a little bit and read it in English. And the reason why I'm reading it in English is because the Rambam actually wrote this in Arabic. Okay, so if he could try, I don't speak ancient medieval Arabic, so I've got a choice between the Hebrew and the English. We'll go with the English. So he writes like this. Afterwards, he divided the material in the order of damages. He divided the first tractate into three parts. He began with Bava Kamma, the first gate, and its topic is speaking about causes of damage. For example, an ox, a pit, or a destroyer, for example, a fire or a grazing animal, and the law of a person who damages. By the way, notice interesting way that the Rambam's brought it here. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the notion of arba, of the notion of four things, and notice the way that he's decided to do it. It's going to be relevant in a second. And a judge is not allowed to have anything precede his remove damage from people, and because of that, he had to precede other laws. So the first thing that we're talking about is all sorts of damage. Damage by objects, damage by animals, damage by people, right? And the role of a judge is first not to try cases in which damage has happened, but rather to remove damage, right? To make sure there aren't hazards from people. That's number one. Bava Metzia, he says, afterwards, Bava Metzia, the middle gate, this topic is speaking about claims and deposits, rental agreements, borrower, renter, and all that is fixing to connect with this topic, as scripture did. It says, after the laws of the ox, the pit, the destroyer, when Memphis spoke about the 4 types of guardians. So this is, the first one is actually when you're breaking things and damaging things and hurting people. The other one is, all sorts of contracts, all sorts of claims, people get into arguments, neighbors get into arguments. And that takes us to Bava Batra, which talks about division of lands. If we have a joint garden, who can do what in the garden? Laws regarding families and neighbors, nullification of buying and selling due to a blemish found in the item. So when can I still take something back to the store? If I gave somebody, I don't know, my wool to dye and they dyed it the wrong color, can I take it back? Speaking about sales and acquisitions and how it's appropriate to judge them, and inheritance. And he arranges the section last because all the received tradition and words of reasoning is not elucidated in the Torah. And I'm going to talk about this a second. It's not elucidated in the Torah. Now, you can already hear from this. The question is, right, are these really 3 distinct areas? Are they sort of all related? And there are many people who suspect that the old Eretz Yisrael tradition is that they're all sort of related, but somehow they came up with a division which worked. And the division was 10 chapters, 10 chapters, and 10 chapters. However, there are many academics who think that the original division was not like that. And in fact, the original division was 5 times 6, if you understand what I mean. That it's built with 6 chapters, but we're going to go with the traditional division. I'll show you the 6-chapter division. You'll see it in a second, okay? So let me just see if yes, you'll see it in the structure of Bava Kamma. We're now going to start learning Bava Kamma, and I'm going to try and explain a little bit about how this is going to work. But just the structure of our Masechet is very simple. Chapter 1 to 6 is about damage by property. In other words, what happens if my animal walks around to your house and eats your prize roses and you're very upset, right? Or I make a fire and it burns down somebody else's, vineyard. Damage by my property, by my animals. And here we'll talk about it. Arba avot nazikin, 4 classic types of damages, right? Hashar, a ox who can gore and impale people. A bar, a pit, right? And then a pit I'll talk about is going to be expanded to all sorts of other things. What happened if I left my jar in the street? Is that like a pit? What happened if I, was shoveling the snow and I shoveled the snow and somebody else trips on my pile of snow, right? Is that considered to be a bar, a pit? Hashor, bar, hamaveh, v'ahever, and we're going to talk about shane and regel. What happens if my animal treads on your things, or what happens if he eats your things? The last one is Aish, fire. Okay, so there are, I've already actually mentioned 5. We'll even get to 6, but there are 4. Basically, the first 6 chapters is all about these 4 categories of damages, and this is what we call nizkei mamon, when my property, my objects do damage. However, chapter 7 to 10 is about human damage. When I, as a human being, do damage, what do I mean? Either gneva, stealing, or gezela. What's the difference between stealing and robbery? The answer is stealing is when I walk off with something and you don't know about it. Robbery is when I actually take something from you and you do know about it. Okay? Robbery is more similar, imagine you've got a class bully and he steals somebody's new pen or whatever it might be. And then we are in a situation in which we have to, sorry, one second, silencing my machine. It's not mine, it's my wife's. And then we have a situation in which so gneva, the interesting gneva, thievery and robbery is that one. I'll put it this way: if you steal something and you don't want to get caught, let's say you're on holiday and somebody steals your camera. You know, in Israel, if you call the police and say somebody stole your laptop from your car, they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to do anything about it because they know that the guy who stole the laptop has already sold it to a pawnbroker within about 10 minutes because he's probably a drug addict or something, and he wants the money. He doesn't want the laptop. Understand what I'm saying? However, robbery is when you actually keep the object, when you're actually somebody who is a mafia guy. And as the mafia guy, right, he's going to show you and he's going to take something of yours and he's going to take your car and he's going to drive around the neighborhood flaunting it, if you understand what I mean. That's the difference between gzeila and gneva. Chovel or mazik is something different. That's when I have a fight with somebody and I beat somebody up. Whichever way, the structure of Bava Kamma is that the first 6 chapters are about damage and property, the last 4 are about human damage, and that's sort of our orientation into Bava Kamma. Okay? We're good? Questions? Now's a good time for questions.
And if you are an attendee, I'm very happy to unmute you. There's a raise the hand icon, ask me in chat. We want to hear from you.
Okay. All right. Sounds like there aren't
I
any
have a
questions.
question. Why
Sure.
would thievery and robbery be in the same thing as damages? Because it's something, you're losing something? Is
exactly,
that the overall?
because I am causing you financial loss. So the question is, if the fire that I was lighting in my field went into your field and destroyed your entire crop, or if I went and then into your field and cut down your entire crop and sold it in the market, as far as you're concerned, you want the same restitution. You want the same, so it's true that they're completely different mechanisms, but as far as you're concerned, the loss that you're incurring is exactly the same. Okay. Or for example, if I slipped on, you left, say the pile of snow, and I slipped on it and I hurt my leg, chas v'shalom. Or if you came up to me and tackled me and hurt my leg, as far as I'm concerned, it's all the same result. Okay, so that's why it's in the same tractate.
Rabbi Israel?
Yes.
I'm just wondering, on a technicality, what is the background to be able to say that Geneva means one thing and Gzela means another? I mean, it has to be some biblical reference that would allow you to say that.
Indeed, there is a biblical reference, and the biblical reference is there is one parsha which is in Mishpatim, which talks about making monetary restitution, and in the other one, it was in Sefer Vayikra, and it's got a completely different mechanism. And the rabbis say, well, how can these two be different? And they make, that's the difference they make, right? One is, again, as I say, a crime that you don't want to be found out. And other one is a crime that you're happy to be found out, right? If you can imagine a society in which gangs rule the neighborhood, right? Not with policing that we have. One is that, like, literally I swiped something from my neighbor without their noticing. The other one is more like a gang. It's violent crime. You understand? That's the difference. And the Torah treats it totally differently. You know what? We're going to do a whole class on it, so don't worry. That's going to be our 5th class. So our 5th class is going to be, we've got 5 classes on the Masechah, and our 5th class is going to be about the difference between Geneva and Gzela. Okay? So we're going to get to that, so don't worry too much about it. Okay, I'm going to try and say something now. Well, what we'll do is, I think what we're going to do is we're going to learn the first Mishnah, and then I want to say something about the relationship between Mishnah and Tanakh. So let's see how we do here. 1 minute. I'm not sure which order to do this. Let's just get going. I want to get going. So I'm going to learn the first Mishnah together with you and give you a bit of familiarity with the structure. And once we've done that, we'll go back to hopefully understanding some of the mechanism that we have here and see what we can do. So I hope you can see the screen, or if you're not on the screen, you can take a look at your source sheet, page 2, and you will see in the table, Arba Avot Nazikin. On the right, you have the Hebrew. On the left, you have English by Rabbi Dr. Joshua Kulp. I should have put Rabbi Doctor. I hope he will excuse me. I will do it for next time. And here we go. Arba Avot Nazikim. Some of you might be familiar with the idea that on Shabbat, there are 39 categories of forbidden work. Likewise here, there are Arba Avot Nazikim, 4 primary causes, or I would actually translate it, primary categories of injury. Hashar, the ox, Habor, the pit, Hamave, the crop-destroying beast, and fire. And now they're going to categorize them. Lohare Ashor Kare Mave. Ashar is not like the Mave. The ox is not like the crop-destroying beast, and the crop-destroying beast is not like the shor, velo zevazem. Both of those. Why are they different? Because, well, as we will see, if an ox gores you, he's not getting any benefit, right? He's just doing an act of violence. Let's say an animal bites you in the street, right? A dog bites you. They're doing that as an act of defense because they're scared or whatever it might be. However, you have a very different situation if a dog eats your shopping. You understand? It's a different type of damage. In each case, the ox is acting very, very differently. So he says, the ox, which means goring, is not like the crop-destroying beast. Nor is either these, which are alive, like fire, which is not alive. Nor is all of these, whose way is to go forth and do injury, like that of the pit, whose way is not to go forth and do injury. What they're saying is the first 3 categories. An ox who gores, an animal who goes and eats your crops, and a fire attacks you. Whereas a bar is something that you walk into. So like somebody leaves some glass in the street, a glass bottle, and you step on it and you cut your foot. Okay? That is a situation which we would call bar. What they have in common. Okay, so how do they all become categories? What they have in common is that it is their way to do injury, and that you're responsible for caring over them. So all of them are threats. You're responsible for looking after them. I've got to look after my ox not to gore, my ox not to go and eat your stuff from your garden. I've got to watch my fire. I've got to watch my pit. And if one of them did injury, whoever is responsible for the injury must make restitution to the damaged party with the best of the land. I want you to see the Hebrew. Ukshehizik, chav hamazik, l'shalem tashlumei nezek b'meitav haaretz. Look at the end of Mishnah 2. Ukshehizik, chav hamazik, l'shalem tashlumei nezek b'meitav haaretz. In the end of Mishnah 3, v'anizak v'hamazik b'tashlumim. According to many people, this is almost like the introduction to the tractate. The tractate almost has a song at the beginning of it. The language here, some of the academics think that these first 3 mishnayot are very, very early mishnayot. They use very dense language. More modern commentators think they might be, it doesn't make a difference. They're their own style. I'll give you an example, Mishnah Bet. Kol shechavti b'shmirato, if I'm obligated in guarding an animal, yechsharti et nisko, I've rendered it possible to do damage. Yechsharti b'mitzat nito, chavti b'tashlum k'hechsher kodev. L'chashim she'em b'hem me'ila, l'chasim el b'nei berit, l'chasim ha'miyuchadim, uv'chol makom, chutz mi'reshut ha'miyuchedet lamazik, or reshut ha'nizak b'hamazik. If you know Mishnah at all, you will know that this is a very unusual style. The style here is almost poetic, and this seems to be like an introduction to the Masechet. Whereas, let's take a look at Mishnah we're just literally surveying and trying to figure out a certain style. Let's look at the last Mishnah of chapter 1 and Mishnah 2. They're going to talk about Chamisha Tamim v'Chamisha Muadim. Just let me explain these two phrases, which might not be familiar to everybody. What is Tam and what is Mu'ad? Okay, I don't know if people know these phrases. Let's just highlight them. Tam and Mu'ad. Tam means something I don't expect to cause damage. Mu'ad is something I expect to do damage. A Tam is a dog who's never bitten anyone. A Mu'ad is a dog who always, who's already bit 5 times, and you've got to really be very careful about it. Okay? So, sorry to be using dogs as an example, but I don't think we use oxen so much. So that's why I'm using that as an example. So they say 5 agents of damage are harmless, and 5 are an attested danger. Okay, that's muad. Okay, so now look what they do. 5 who are not. The tooth of an animal is tested. Sorry, a cattle are not attested to butt, push, bite, lie down, or kick. In other words, a usual animal won't do any of those things. It won't bite you. It won't push you. It won't butt you. Usually it won't do that. However, these things an animal does do. Hashain, the teeth, will eat. Animals eat. That's not unusual. Regel, the animal will tread on things without noticing. That it will do. Shor hamuan, then if you have a wild animal, that will be wild. Shor hamazik b'rshut hanizak, v'adam. In other words, the first 5 instances, is a different category to the last 4. Now, I want to show you what happens now. What they now do in chapter 4 or chapter 2 is they explicate all of these. Ketzad haregel, how is the leg of a beast? Mishnah 2. Ketzad hashain, how is the tooth of a beast? Mishnah 4. Ezehu tam, ezehu muad. Mishnah 5. Shor hamazik b'rshut hanizak. Mishnah 6. Adam mu'ad le'olam. You see what they're doing here? They've already set up, and maybe let me stop sharing and explain, and I'm going to try and explain what I'm trying to present to you. What I'm trying to say is, what you can see the Mishnah doing is, the Mishnah is already creating legal paradigms. It's creating legal paradigms. I will show you in a second that all of these cases actually come from the Torah. What they're trying to do is create legal paradigms and to make rules about them. There are 4 categories of work. These things are not considered to be those things, or these things are not liable. No, not 4 categories of damage. These things are liable, these things are not. There are, even within each category, there are things which are prone to damage and things which are not prone to damage. How are we going to deal with all of these? They're creating a whole map, a whole conceptual legal framework for all of this. That's how Mishnah works. Now, let me try and explain something before I go on. Lisa, I see you've got a question, but just give me 1 minute. I want to explain what's really happening here. In a minute, we're going to look at the Torah and see the way the Torah deals with this. But what we're going to see is that the Torah always is going to give us what I would call case studies. Case studies. Case studies are very specific. I know some of you, I don't know, maybe attended Harvard Business School. They give you case studies, right? So you have a case study and you're meant to learn from it. The Torah gives us case studies. Now, once I have a case study, I might be able to extrapolate, but do I have a rule to work out for a completely different case? Then we can argue, is it like this? Is it like that? Is it like this? Is it like that? And so sometimes what a legal mechanism wants to do is take all the cases and create rules out of them. And once you create the rules, once you create a legal framework, you can create a conceptualization. You can drill down the cases out of their specificity. You now create rules which can apply across the board. I will stress that sometimes the new rules create new situations. I'll give you an example, totally different, and then we'll see the example without case. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin wants to know who cannot be a witness in court. And it gives 4 groups. It says, if you are somebody who practices usury, if you lend with interest, you're not trustworthy. If you deal in food from Shemitah, you're not trustworthy. Because if you are a gambler and you make your money from pigeon races, you're not reliable. And the 4th one is also a gambler, somebody who plays with dice. Then the Gemara says, well, what are we talking about? What, you just played a game with dice? No, it means somebody whose whole income is from that. These are 4 situations that they give of types of people whose entire livelihood comes from unscrupulous things, and they consider these people to be non-trustworthy in court. Now, I need to know, nobody nowadays races pigeons or anything like that. So now, how do I figure it out? So the rabbis go back and they try and create rules. By the time we reach somebody called, one second, I've got it in my notes, but give me half a second. By the time we reach Rav Shmuel ben Chofni, he's got 46 categories of people who can't be a witness. Until along comes the Rif and says, no, I'll tell you what it is. The definition of a person who can't be a witness is a rasha, is an evil person. And who's a rasha? Anybody who should get lashes. Now, by the way, he created one rule, and that applies in 70 cases. So what happened? The Mishnah mentioned 4 cases. The later rabbis tried to conceptualize, but end up applying to a much broader palette of things. Do you understand what's going on? That's how law gets created. And that's what we're watching in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Bava Kamma. Bava Kamma is going to look at the Torah and take things out of their narrative structure, out of their case study structure, creates 4 categories, and it establishes some basic rules. And then, almost like there's going to be 2 layers to the Mishnah. One is establishing the basic rules, and then what does the Mishnah then do? Ketzad haregel. What do you mean when you say the foot? Oh, it applies in this case, in this case, in this case. Ketzad hashem. What do you mean an animal who eats? Oh, it's an A and B and C. What do you mean an animal which gores? Oh, it's an A and B and C. So once you've created the rules, now we have to reapply them. You understand? In a nutshell, that is what's happening in the Mishnah. Okay? So, Lisa, you had a question.
Oh, just a quick question. I think you're about to answer it. So a cattle who bites somebody where it's not their typical behavior, the owner might be not liable for that, unless of course the cattle had bit somebody previously.
Right, it's exactly the mechanism they're saying. They're saying, since it's not normal for, you can take your donkey or your ox through the marketplace, and it hasn't got a history of violence. And what it's likely to do is it might step on my fabric, which I left on the floor, because it doesn't notice fabric on the floor, and it might also eat my shopping, but it won't. It's not likely to butt you or to bite you, right? And so therefore, the person who was leading the ox through didn't need to anticipate that, because he's done it 100 times and nothing's happened. Okay, so there'll be a different degree of responsibility if I know that the ox has a habit of doing such a thing, which will be established, as we'll see, by him doing it 3 times, than if he's never done it before. Okay, so let's get to the last bit of what we're going to do today, because I don't want to go more than an hour, because I think an hour is way too long even online. But let's just go back to our sheet, and I'm going to share and just show you where these things come from. Let me just say that, interestingly enough, the rabbis, if you look at source number 2, here, you will see that the rabbis had a very interesting way of looking at the different laws. They said some laws are horchim ba'avir. They're like floating in the air. And what they meant that was that ein lahem al mashi yismechu. They've got no textual basis. I'll read the Mishnah. The halachot of dissolution of vows, heter nadarim, When one requests a sage to dissolve them, fly in the air. They have nothing to support them. These halachot are not mentioned explicitly in the Torah. Lords of Shabbat. Oh, that's interesting. Shabbat, it always says, don't alot aseh melacha, don't do melacha. But it doesn't tell us what melacha is. Chagigot and meilot. Harehem kaharim tulim b'sara. They're like mountains suspended by a hair. They have little in the Torah, and yet the details are numerous. However, monetary law, dinim, that's what we're learning. Monetary law, sacrificial rights, ritual purity, impurity, forbidden sexual relations have something to support them. Yesh lehem al mashi yismechu. They have ein he gufei Torah. And these are the essential parts of the Torah. What the Mishnah is telling us is that there are some areas of Jewish law which are completely rabbinic and they don't have Torah basis. But our rules, our Masechet, has a very strong Torah basis. And what is it? It comes from Parshat Mishpatim, as you can see here on, what is it, page 4 of your handout, page 4. Page 4, exactly. Page 4 of your handout. I want to just show you the psukim, and then we'll end for today. Okay? So I want you to understand that in the Torah, and you'll see the different conceptualization here. We're going to read quite a bit, but we're going to see what's happening here. This is Parshat Mishpatim, which gives a lot of civil law. And what's it saying? Starts off with, Makeh ish v'meit mot yumat. If somebody facially strikes another party, they will be put to death. What is this? Murder in the first degree. And if a man did so not by design, and it came out by an act of God, if there was an accident, then they can go to Ir Miklat. But when one party schemes against another and kills through treachery, that person shall be put to death. So all of this, I'm going to highlight it all, sorry. All of this is about murder. But now let's look what happens after this. One who strikes a father and mother, one who kidnaps another party, one who insults a father or mother or curses them. When two parties quarrel, and listen to this case, when two parties quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or a fist. So I have beaten somebody up and the victim does not die, but has to be taken to bed. So I need to recuperate, right? If one I have to pay for his time off work and I have to cure him. Then it talks about striking a slave, right? Then it talks about if two parties fight and one pushes a pregnant woman and she has a miscarriage, what are you meant to do? All of this, it started with murder and it goes into personal injury. A human being hurting another person. Now let's keep going down. Let's look at the verse 28, the next highlight. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned and its flesh shall not be eaten. The owner of the ox is not to be punished. Now, if the ox had a habit of goring and its owner was warned, then the ox shall be stoned and the owner also shall be put to death. Okay. What's this talking about? An animal. It's not a person hurting a person. This is an animal killing a person, right? Now look at the next case. It's in verse 33, Lamed Gimel, or as you can see it, it's highlighted on your page. When any party opens a pit, and when any party digs a pit, and you don't cover it, and then something falls in, an ox or an ass, the one responsible for the pit must make restitution. So here we're talking about paying money, paying the price to the owner, but keeping the dead animal. Okay. When an artist's ox enters another neighbor's ox, so now this is not an ox killing somebody or even injuring somebody. This is an ox goring an ox. Somebody else's property injures my property. Then notice there is stealing. You see the stealing in green? When any party steals an ox or a sheep. And now let's go back to the green highlights. Sorry, the yellow highlights. Ki aver ish ster kerem. When any party owns livestock, lets it loose. Oh, sorry, I missed out one. Ki aver, yeah. Ki aver ish stel kerem v'shilach et b'iro. U'bi'er b'stel kerem meitav saleh meitav karmu shalem. When a party owns livestock, lets it loose to graze in another man's land, and allows a field or vineyard to be grazed there, restitution must be made for the impairment of the field or vineyard. And when a fire is started and spreads to thorns, so that stacked or standing or growing grain is consumed, the one who started the fire must make restitution. Okay. I hope that was somewhat clear, but what I want to show you is how complicated it is, right? Why? Because notice you can order this material in 5 different ways, right? You can, now, what we decided was that there were 4 avot nezikim. What were the 4? Number 1 was the ox which gores another ox. Number 2 was the pit. Number 3 was my ox going into another field to eat. And number 4 was the case of the fire, right? Now, what about a human injury? What about a human who injures somebody? Should that be in or should that be out? And in fact, that's the biggest argument, right? Should human beings be considered to be one of the avot nezikin, right? Because now, on the one hand, if you looked at the human beings, is it included in there? It's actually in the section before, and that section starts off with capital cases, which belong in Masechet Sanhedrin, where I kill somebody, and then it says, okay, maybe you didn't kill somebody, but you injured them, so maybe I should put a human injuring another human not in Masechet Bava Kamma at all. Maybe it doesn't go with the avot nezikin because I'm intelligent, I'm responsible, and all the other instances are something which doesn't have independent, responsibility. So what I want to show you is that what the rabbis are doing in Masechet Bava Kamma is they're doing a really interesting job to try and, as I said before, the Torah has case studies. How can we create a legal system out of the case studies? And that's what we're watching happening. And once they create these 4 categories, now they need to say, okay, so what is the definition of shane, of the teeth? What's the definition of the foot? What's the definition of the ox? What's the definition of the fire? What's the definition of the pit? And that's what you're going to be reading, right? Because they've taken a very complicated parasha with lots of cases and created categories. Some things don't quite fit. You could create a different halachic paradigm. We'll look at a different one next week, and we'll see how we can work with what we have. Okay? Questions to end? All right, we will leave it there. Thank you. I hope this was useful. It gave people a sense of orientation vis-a-vis. And if anybody has any comments they'd like to send me about the level, if the level was too easy, if the level was too advanced, whichever it is, I'm putting my email in the chat right now, alexisrael99@gmail.com, and you are more than welcome to contact me. Tell me if I was responding to what I could see from the crowd here. It seemed like the level sort of matched, but it could be there are some people here who say no, this was all very elementary, or this was very, very complicated. So I'd love to hear your responses, and let me know.
Do you have any suggestions on something to get a background overview for nezikin?
Nezikin in particular. There's some good introduction. Maybe there might be some stuff in Rav Adin Steinsaltz has a book called The Essential Talmud, and maybe that might be good. That might have a good, that might have something which might be helpful.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, toda.
Thank you, Rabbi Israel. Thank you, everyone who came and joined us for the start of a new Seder and for a new chunk of Mishnayot. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Best of luck following along with the Mishnah Yomit schedule on your own. And if you want to learn more with Drisha, you can go to drisha.org/classes. And with that, I hope to see you all next week. Have a good evening. Have a good day and take care.